The Fox Spirit of Forbidden Love. Part 1 of 3. I have lived longer than I care to remember, perhaps 1,000 years. Time loses its meaning when you exist alone, drifting through the centuries like a shadow. I have watched empires rise and crumble, seen the seasons circle in endless cycles, yet through it all I remained, unseen, untouched, a spirit of the earth. I am a fox spirit, but unlike the others of my kind, I have never craved power or dominance over the human world. My fur, when I choose to reveal it, is a pristine white, shimmering like the snow that blankets the mountains in winter. My 9 tails sway gracefully behind me, each one a symbol of my ancient nature. My eyes, sharp and golden, reflect the moonlight that has been my only companion through these endless nights. When I take on my human form, I shed my fur, my 9 tails disappearing as if they were never there. I become something delicate, something mortal. My hair flows like ink down my back, long and dark, and my skin is pale, almost translucent beneath the moon's soft glow. But this human shape is a mask, an illusion I have worn for centuries, and no matter how well I wear it, I am still the fox beneath, the eternal creature, bound to the wilds. For as long as I have existed, I have wandered through the forests and mountains, an invisible observer to the fleeting lives of mortals. I have seen their joy, their sorrow, their triumphs, and their tragedies, all from a distance. I could never be part of their world. I knew that from the beginning. Yet, there was always a longing that stirred deep within me. It was faint at first, a quiet ache, like a soft breeze rustling through the leaves. But over the centuries, it grew stronger. It was the laughter of children, the warmth of lovers in each other's arms, the quiet companionship of old friends that drew me in. I envied them, these humans, so fragile, so brief in their existence, and yet so full of life. They burned brightly, like stars in the night, and then they were gone, leaving only memories in their wake. I envied the way they loved, the way they lived without hesitation, without fear of the inevitable end. I had seen humans from afar for so long that their lives became a part of me. I learned their patterns, their habits, their joys and their sorrows. I knew the rhythms of their lives, the rise and fall of their hearts, but still, I remained separate. A fox cannot walk among them, no matter how much she might want to. The loneliness became a part of me, like a scar that never healed. I wandered through the centuries, unnoticed, forgotten by the world, and yet, the longing remained. It was the one thing I could never escape. The desire to be seen, to be known, to be part of something, even if only for a moment. As time went on, that desire grew, pressing against me like the weight of an invisible tide. I began to watch the humans more closely, my heart stirring whenever I saw them laugh or cry. I told myself that it was foolish, that no good would come from stepping into their world. And yet, the more I watched, the more I found myself drawn to them, to their brief but brilliant lives. It was on a quiet night, under a sky filled with stars, that I noticed him. At first, he seemed like any other human, a simple man, his dark hair a bit unkempt, his clothes plain and worn from travel. But there was something about him, something in the way he carried himself. His eyes, deep and thoughtful, were filled with a quiet sadness, a loneliness that mirrored my own. He wasn't like the others. There was something more to him, something that drew me closer. I told myself it was nothing, a passing curiosity. But the more I watched him, the more I felt that invisible thread between us grow stronger. It was as if we were bound by some unseen force, something that had been waiting for this moment, for us to find each other. From the shadows of the forest, I watched him, Day after day, night after night, I studied his every move, learning the rhythm of his life. His days were spent in quiet study, his brow often furrowed in concentration as he pored over scrolls and books, lost in thought. He was a scholar, a man of intellect and curiosity, constantly seeking knowledge, as though it could fill the quiet void within him. His home was modest, tucked away on the edge of the village, far enough from the noise of the world that he could find peace in his work. I would sit beneath the ancient oak trees, hidden by the shadows, and watch as he scribbled notes, his face bathed in the soft glow of a candle. He was diligent, focused, and often seemed lost to the world around him. But at night, when the moon rose high in the sky, he would leave his home and wander toward the river. It was there, by the water's edge, that I saw the other side of him, the man who carried a quiet sadness in his heart. He would sit on the bank, staring out at the rippling water as though searching for answers in its depths. His eyes, those dark, thoughtful eyes, seemed to reflect the same longing I felt in my own soul. It was in these moments that I felt closest to him, even though I had never spoken a word to him. For weeks I watched in silence, my heart growing heavier with each passing day. I knew it was dangerous, foolish even, to feel anything for a human. And yet, as I observed him in those quiet moments by the river, something inside me began to change. I found myself drawn to him, not just as an observer, but as something more. I wanted to understand him, to know what thoughts weighed so heavily on his mind, what sadness lingered in his heart. It was a feeling I hadn't known in centuries, a soft, aching pull that I could neither explain nor resist. He was just a man, I told myself, one of many I had seen in my long life. And yet, every time I watched him, I felt a warmth stir in my chest, a yearning I had not felt in 1,000 years. I couldn't deny it anymore. I wanted to meet him. The idea terrified me. I had spent so long in the shadows, always keeping my distance, always watching but never touching the world I longed to be part of. But something about him made me want to risk it. I knew it was dangerous. If he saw through my guise, if he knew what I truly was, it would all be over. But the pull was too strong, the connection too real. I could feel it deep in my bones, in the very core of my being. So one night, I made my decision. I chose the moment carefully, waiting for a night when the moon was full, its light casting a soft glow over the riverbank. I knew his routine by now. He would come to the river at dusk, sit for a while, and then leave, always at the same time, always lost in his own thoughts. I positioned myself just out of sight, my heart pounding in my chest as I waited for him to arrive. When I saw him walking down the familiar path, his eyes fixed on the ground ahead, I felt a flutter of nervousness, something I hadn't felt in centuries. This was it, my moment. I stepped out from the trees, my human form carefully crafted, my robe flowing softly in the night breeze. I feigned surprise as I accidentally stumbled onto the path, letting out a small gasp as I pretended not to have seen him coming. "Oh!" I exclaimed, my voice soft and startled. "I didn't see you there." He stopped immediately, concern flickering in his eyes as he looked at me. "I'm sorry," he replied gently, his voice just as kind as I had imagined it would be. "Are you all right?" I nodded, my heart still racing. "Yes, I'm fine. I was just lost in thought, I suppose." He smiled then, a soft, warm smile that eased the tension in my chest. There was no suspicion in his gaze, only kindness, and I felt the fear that had gripped me begin to fade. He was as gentle in person as he had seemed from afar, his eyes filled with the same quiet sadness, but also something more, something I couldn't quite name. "It's a peaceful place to think," he said, his gaze drifting to the river. "I often come here for the same reason." I smiled back, a small tentative curve of my lips. "It is beautiful, especially at night." We stood there in the soft moonlight, a comfortable silence settling between us. The tension in my body slowly eased as the night wrapped around us, the gentle sound of the river flowing nearby. It felt natural being near him, as though this was where I was meant to be. For the first time in 1,000 years, I didn't feel alone. He glanced at me, his eyes thoughtful. "Do you come here often?" he asked, his voice quiet but curious. I nodded slowly, careful to keep my answer light. "Sometimes. It's peaceful here, away from everything." His gaze drifted to the river, and he smiled softly. "It is. I've always found places like this help clear my mind." He paused as if weighing his words before continuing. "I spend most of my time with books, trying to uncover what's left of the old histories. It's like chasing shadows sometimes." "Shadows," I echoed, feeling a strange connection to the word. "But you find light in them, don't you?" He looked at me, something lighting up behind his eyes as though I had touched on a truth he held dear. "I try to," he admitted, his voice softening. "There's always more to find, more to understand. And the more I learn, the more I realize how much is still hidden." I listened, captivated by the passion in his voice. His words flowed like the river beside us, carrying with them the weight of his thoughts. I offered only small responses, enough to keep him talking, careful not to reveal too much of myself. But something stirred within me, something I have never felt before. I felt seen. For the first time in 1,000 years, I felt as though someone truly saw me, not just as the illusion I had created, but as something more. His gaze held a quiet curiosity, a warmth that made my heart ache with a sweetness I hadn't known in centuries. I had always been the watcher, the silent observer, but here, in this moment, I was part of the world, even if only for a brief time. When the time came to part ways, he hesitated, his eyes lingering on me with a quiet question. "Will I see you again?" he asked, his voice soft, almost hopeful. I smiled, feeling the bittersweet ache of my own longing. "Perhaps," I whispered, "if fate allows." And with that, I disappeared into the night, my heart still racing, my fox form taking over once more as I returned to the shadows. For the first time in 1,000 years, I had experienced something I had never thought possible. I had spoken to him, connected with him, shared a moment of sweetness that lingered in the air like the scent of flowers on a summer breeze. It was magical, something fleeting but perfect in its brevity. I knew I couldn't stay. I couldn't let myself fall deeper into this world of humans, no matter how much I wanted to. He deserved a life, a real life, with someone who could give him what I never could. And yet, I couldn't help but savor that night, our sweet, accidental meeting, knowing it was something I would carry with me for the rest of my long, eternal life. That's all for tonight. If you enjoy my bedtime stories, please like and subscribe to my channel. Thank you for joining me tonight.